Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Squadron, president of Our Energy Policy, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today in this unofficial last week of summer as we lead into Labor Day. I hope all of you have stayed healthy and you're managing well during this challenging time. We're very pleased today to have joining us Michael Shellenberger, the author of the book Apocalypse Never, to discuss that book and his views on energy policy. He's going to join us in a moment. Before we get to him, just a couple of quick things. First of all, I really want to thank our partners and sponsors: Con Edison, National Grid, API, Broadscale, Schiff Hardin, US Grid, our underwriter for the series BP, and my co-host for this particular webinar, the law firm Bracewell LLP, and Jeff Holmstead, who will join us at the end for some concluding remarks. So thanks to all of you for your support. I also want to point out for all of you attending that we do have the opportunity to put in questions for Michael for the last third or so of the hour we're going to be speaking with him. So if you do have questions, if you look at the right-hand bar on your screen, there's an area for questions. If you just type them in and hit submit, we'll get to as many as we can for the last part of the conversation with Michael. Also, if we're not able to get to them, or even if we are able to get to your questions, we're going to have on the OEP website an online discussion beginning early next week, which will be a continuing discussion of the topics addressed by Michael in this webinar. So there'll be an opportunity for people to weigh in, ask additional questions, express their views in that online conversation. And I urge all of you, if you haven't already registered as an expert participant in our conversations, to do that and join us for that online discussion following the webinar today. So again, thank you. And we're now going to welcome Michael. I'll introduce him by saying, I can only give some of his activities, accomplishments, and so forth over his more than 30 years of involvement in climate and environmental issues. I mean, he is the co-founder, past president of the Breakthrough Institute. He is currently the founder and president of Environmental Progress. He is the author of numerous books and articles on energy, environmental, and climate topics, as well as other topics. And of course, most recently, the author of the recently published book, Apocalypse Never, much talked about in the couple of months since it's been released. So Michael, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Well, why don't we get right into it? And just to get us started, maybe you can discuss what prompted you to write Apocalypse Never and touch on the main issues of the book.
Sure. So just as background, I'm a lifelong environmental activist. I've been an environmental activist for 33 years, been a climate activist for 20 years. I did a lot of advocacy on renewables. I then changed my mind about nuclear power and have advocated for nuclear for the last 10 years. And I was working on a book about nuclear, and then last year, the conversation about climate change just got so crazy, with people saying things like billions of people will die, and adolescent children worried that they wouldn't live long enough to have their own kids. And as the father of two kids aged 14 and 21, they're fine because I talked to them. But it bothered me, and sometimes people say, oh, but doesn't that help that people say these exaggerated things because that's what you care about too? I always compare, imagine you're a cancer doctor. The story for cancer is that we're getting much better at treating it. There's all sorts of incredible successes we've had. It's not going away, but I don't think cancer doctors think that we should go around saying that billions of people are going to die in 10 or 20 years because of cancer. And so I felt the need to push back against the extremism. It just had gotten too, it was having negative mental health consequences, plus it's also been used to perpetuate some pretty negative things, particularly working through the World Bank and other banks to basically deny poor countries, particularly in Africa, but also South Asia, cheap, reliable electricity instead of imposing expensive, unreliable renewables, and also being used as cover for shutting down nuclear power plants, which we need for a bunch of different reasons, including dealing with climate change. So there was a lot of motivations, but those were certainly some of them.
You know, you mentioned climate change, and there's been a lot of commentary about your book. Some have even labeled you a climate denier. Maybe you could summarize your views on climate change and how you see the threat that it poses.
Sure. So my view, the book argues that climate change is real, that it poses risks that we should take seriously, that we should take action on it, and in fact are taking action on it, have been taking action on it for decades, making pretty good progress on it. That the worst scenarios of the highest warming are basically impossible, if not extremely unlikely. And that it's not the most important problem in the world. It's not the most important environmental problem. There's just a whole bunch of other things that are still more important. Ordinary air pollution still kills more people than any increase in deaths that we can imagine from climate change. I think that the use of the land, which is contributing to a loss of habitat and threatens a number of species, is a more important problem. Look, the people that I'm criticizing in this book are activist scientists and activist journalists who get the science wrong, and they deliberately mislead people about it. Quite understandably, they have encouraged people not to read Apocalypse Never, and they've done so by misrepresenting the book. So they're just telling people things that are just not accurate. So I told you my views of climate change, so then they say, oh, he's a climate denier. Well, that's obviously false. People have said, in the book, I argue that there's a moral progression alongside a physical progression from wood and dung to coal to natural gas to uranium, and that it's not about natural gas good or bad? It's the wrong question. Natural gas is obviously better than coal. Almost everybody agrees with that. It's not as good on basic environmental and human measures as nuclear energy is. So we have to view it as a progression, but people say, oh, Michael's just advocating nuclear. It's obviously not true. To anybody that reads the book knows that. And much of the book is grappling with this big question of how to both accommodate the desires of 2 billion people who are still living in backbreaking poverty using wood and dung as their primary energy. How do you accommodate that with also protecting endangered species? And yet I've had some people suggest that somehow endangered species isn't my concern. So there's been things I just would encourage. I think the problem with people lying about the book is that anybody who reads it will see that that person was misrepresenting what's actually in it.
You know, you just made a point about natural gas, which I'd like to follow up on, because you do make the point in the book about natural gas being a bridge to a cleaner energy landscape, particularly in developing nations. But there are some, I think, that worry that natural gas ends up becoming the destination rather than a bridge. So how do you see that kind of evolution? Is there a catalyst for moving to cleaner fuels than natural gas? And how do you avoid it becoming the destination as opposed to that bridge?
So the big story in Apocalypse Never that most people have never heard, including people that work in energy or that work on the environment. I mean, it's incredible after 30 years of headline blaring news about climate change and environmental problems. Most people don't know that there's a very basic physical reality, which is that wood and dung and other renewables, which is what they are, including wind and water and other form of renewables energy, they're energy dilute. There's less energy per unit of wood than in a lump of coal. And there's more energy in petroleum and natural gas per unit of mass or per volume than there is in coal. And when you get to uranium, it's off the charts, 1 million times more energy per unit of per unit of mass. And it's even more dramatic with a slightly different measure called power density, which is the amount of power produced by a mine or a factory or a power plant. It's simple to measure. It's just the land footprint and the amount of power it produces. Well, what it means is that energy density determines environmental impact. The more of the natural resource, the more of the natural environment that's required to generate energy means that it's going to have a much larger environmental impact. It's super simple. Like, I don't even need any math to explain this concept to you. And yet very few people know this. People think that moving towards renewables, which require 300 to 400 times more land than natural gas or a nuclear plant, is somehow better for the environment. It shows how alienated we are both from the natural environment and also how ignorant we have been made by this, I think, constructed ignorance of energy density and power density. So when it comes to questions like that hierarchy, this energy ladder, so to speak, yeah, that's my view. People say, I mean, I actually argue in favor, I defend coal in my book. I mean, talk about a scandal. I defend coal. Well, because who would deny poor countries that use wood and dung as their primary energy electricity from coal plants? Okay, there are some people that are doing that. I think it's unethical, colonialistic, but nonetheless, that's often the first step for countries. Now, the good news is we're so abundant in natural gas right now, not just because of fracking in the United States, but also because of just the success in the offshore drilling, that many countries are not going to need to go to coal. And so under the really scary global warming scenarios, they assume that global coal demand would quintuple, when in fact we know that's not going to happen. We're in for a long century of gas. So for me, I never actually use the word bridge, because I think all energy technologies are bridge technologies. I think after the world is 100% nuclear, then maybe nuclear fission, then maybe we'll have some new kind of nuclear, maybe fusion or something else. But for me, the story of energy transitions is the main event. And so I don't want to get into this. There's been this idea, which is sort of like, well, we're going to impose this kind of energy system. It just doesn't work like that. It's an organic phenomenon. And if you've got coal and you can go to natural gas, that's great. If you've got nuclear plants, don't replace them with natural gas. That would be crazy. You would be increasing air pollution as well as carbon pollution by doing that.
Let's talk a little bit more about nuclear, as you brought it up, and you spent a lot of time in the book discussing. And as you discuss in the book, there are people who argue that not only is nuclear on the decline, but it's been on the decline for economic reasons, that natural gas and renewables will outcompete nuclear in the market. What's your view on kind of this issue overall, and what the approach should be to nuclear, how we should be thinking about it, both in the context of this economics argument and more broadly?
I mean, the first thing you have to understand about nuclear energy is that its primary use is as a weapon. And this is forgotten, ignored deliberately by the nuclear industry, by the nuclear scientific and technical community, by the hobbyists and the enthusiasts. That's what nuclear was invented to be. That was its first major application. And the other thing we need to know about it is that we're not going to ever be able to get rid of it, as much as anybody might want to. And I think it is one of the big motivations for the radical left, certainly, but even many moderate Democrats, and that's the official policies, that will somehow get rid of it. But we've known since 1945, there's been good scholarship that just explained that, if China and India were to get rid of their nuclear weapons and then go to war, what would they do? The first thing they would do is reconstruct their nuclear weapons and potentially use them on each other. Not necessarily, but they could, and it would be more dangerous in that situation than to just have the nuclear weapons acting as deterrent threats, which is what they've been doing. We saw it happen multiple times now between India and Pakistan. We now saw it with India and China. Many people might have missed the fact that they had a little bit of a war. Neither side was going to escalate. So the fundamental reality of nuclear energy is that it's used to make weapons. Okay, so that's the first thing, and I draw attention to it because if you don't have the awareness of that's what we're talking about, then I think what happens is that our conversations about nuclear energy are contaminated, controlled, influenced by an unconscious fear of nuclear weapons. And so I think it's important to talk about that. Now, so when we're talking about nuclear energy and its purposes, I think we have to understand that it is a dual use technology, and it's an extremely difficult one to understand. It's a much more difficult it's a way to understand it because of its dual use nature. So, for example, nuclear weapons are the most dangerous objects on Earth, as far as I'm concerned, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. They're the only ways that we know how to cause something close to what we consider apocalypse. Um, Climate change just doesn't offer those scenarios. There's not even a scenario for the death toll from disasters or disease to reverse itself and go back up. So only nuclear weapons present that apocalyptic fear. And I think some of those fears actually are what people have when they talk about climate change. But I think the first thing to understand about it is that nuclear energy is thus more important in a fundamental way than climate change. It's certainly a greater threat. Nuclear energy is arguably our greatest challenge. I mean, when you consider the potential threat of nuclear weapons pose, it never stopped being one of our greatest challenge. Now, I don't think it's as great of a risk of, I don't think we're as great as a risk of nuclear war. I think the risk of nuclear war has gone down very significantly since World War II, but nonetheless, it's still there. And if you accept that we're not going to be getting rid of nuclear weapons, particularly by starting with getting rid of our nuclear power plants, then you have to ask, how should we deal with this technology? And some people might say, just try to limit it as much as possible, even if we can't get rid of it. I think that's actually what a number of opponents are saying. I think there's another approach which says it's a very powerful technology, requires incredible care and concentration and discipline to manage, both on the weapons and the energy side. But the benefits of the energy source are so extraordinary. Just to give you a sense of it, environmentally, electricity, a world powered by nuclear, both the electricity plus all the heat for cooking, transportation fuels, just if you had 100% nuclear, the humankind's footprint from energy goes to almost zero. When you consider that, even the uranium mining now, they're just putting hot water into the earth, getting the uranium up. The footprint of the plants is tiny. So then the question is, if we accept that we would like to take advantage of this remarkable energy source, I think that requires getting our heads screwed on right about what it is and getting over some of our more neurotic or phobic feelings towards it, embracing the responsibility to use it to its highest potential, which is to make carbon-free, clean energy, and then have a national program to scale it up in ways that are cost-effective for ratepayers and for taxpayers. And the way to do that is to standardize a single design. You have a construction crews that know how to make that design over and over again. Stop with the constant changing of designs. The design we have is really great. The accidents we've had are totally to be expected, with far lower mortality than anybody would have imagined or did imagine. And really, it's just our hangups about it is the main event. It's not a problem of design. It's not a problem of financing mechanisms. It's not really even a problem of policy. It's really a problem of our own heads.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, one of the things you get into in the book is that a big part of the issue, in your view, about nuclear is the kind of reaction it generates in so many people, and that, part of the issue is a messaging and education issue. I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. I mean, what would you advocate in terms of dealing with how nuclear is discussed? What kind of messaging and education would you feel is desirable around this whole area?
Well, we're struggling with it. I mean, I'm doing it. We're doing it right here. I don't know if it's a messaging thing. I think it's almost more of a spiritual thing, in the sense of us trying to realize that we have this extraordinary power, this extraordinarily dangerous power, and paradoxically, it makes the safest electricity. Um, and that really, like, that's the main event. People, because really, like, how to make nuclear successful, we know how to do that. I mean, we have these periods where we do it. and then various fears arise around the technology, and various financial interests get involved, and we sort of stop. This is true for really everywhere, but certainly France, the United States, Japan. And we start changing the technology, and the engineers are allowed to control the process, and they keep wanting to change things, and it just makes it more expensive and a mess. So, I wish that the human race I wish there'd be a way for the human race to get over its hang up about this faster. And I don't know how to do that. Honestly, people wouldn't have wanted to read a whole book about it. People don't want to, even when we do these, when I do these Zoomcasts, we don't want to spend our whole time talking about nuclear. It's too intense. And so in some ways I go, it's going to take a while. And the good news is that we have a lot of natural gas, and we're not going to have to do a lot of coal. From a climate perspective, that buys us a pretty significant amount of time. But certainly I kind of think, my view is on the 100th anniversary of the bomb, we're on the 75th anniversary now, but on the 100th anniversary, 25 years from now, I think that we will be at a place of much greater comfort with the technology than we are now. And that's just, I think, a function of it having been really scary, particularly for baby boomers. I just did a Zoom call with a very senior, very well-known former Democratic senator, and otherwise, and did other things. And he sort of suggested he was open to nuclear, but by the end of the conversation, he made it clear that he really wasn't. And so I just think there's just a lot of people that say they're open to it. They want to do some R&D, but they're not really. And I just think in some ways it's a generational problem.
Well, we won't spend the whole time talking about it, but I do have one more question kind of about it, kind of playing off that last comment you made. I think a lot of the concern that people often articulate is around waste. And when you're talking about it on the kind of scale you're talking about, how do you address the issue of waste? Again, when you're thinking about it on the kind of large scale that you envision in your sort of construct.
Right. So the first thing we know about the environment is what we want to do is produce less pollution, which is waste byproduct in the natural environment, and that means producing less waste. So nuclear is just radical in this way. What we call the waste is the used fuel rods. They go through the plant for a couple of years, they cool in some water for a couple of years, and then they go in steel canisters and cement on the site of production. All of the waste the US has ever generated can fit on a single football field stacked 50 feet high. It's the environmental solution to all other waste problems, especially when you consider you need a lot of energy to either incinerate or recycle or landfill waste. So the used fuel rods is the benefit. The fact that all the waste can be stored on site of production and not externalized into the natural environment. Every solar panel, every wind turbine goes to landfills. Okay, none of it's recycled. None of it ever will be. It will always be cheaper to buy the raw materials for solar panels fresh. So you get 300 times more waste from solar panels. None of it's contained. I always point out, like, if we're going to expand a bunch of solar in the United States, they should have to both decommission. They have to pay for the decommissioning and should pay for the waste. That's what we require of nuclear plants. We should require it of all other plants. So I don't think this is a concern about waste. I mean, I don't think that's what's really going on here. I think it's a kind of displacement psychologically of those fears about the bomb. I think there's even more weird stuff. I've been seeing this, the book ends, just to kind of point something in the book, with kind of a reflection that a lot of environmentalism seems like it's motivated by a fear of death. And by that, I mean, there's all this stuff around sustainability and circularity, and oh my God, we can't leave it. That there's a kind of a sense in which that the waste reminds us of our deaths, and in fact, that's one of the great books that was written on the rise of nuclear fears, where he sort of concludes, that waste in general reminds us of our finitude, and that provokes a kind of existential anxiety that is just it's obviously not rational in the sense of what's better from an environmental physical point of view. So I can't help but think it is basically grounded in some fears of death that are related to fears of nuclear, but that I think animate a lot of environmentalism. I mean, I see this kind of phobia around waste in general as a kind of OCD. You know, David Sedaris talks about how he suffers from OCD and he makes himself feel better by picking up trash on the side of the road, which is, by the way, a perfectly healthy way to deal with your OCD. But I find that that sort of thing hovers over the nuclear waste problem, and it's internalized within the nuclear industry. Like, why would you need Yucca Mountain? They want to transport the waste from where it's best held, and they want to move it across the country and then bury it underground. As an anthropologist dropout, for me, that appears to be a religious ritual. You know, you bury your dead. That's what humans do. That's what defined humans. And so this idea we're going to bury this thing, I think it actually symbolizes the great ambivalence that the nuclear energy industry, which is really just electric utilities, that accidentally ended up owning these nuclear plants because the US government in the 50s and 60s thought it was important to do that. They're themselves phobic about this. I visited the waste. When I go to nuclear plants, I visited the waste recently, was in Arizona. It was like, this is just a model decision to put this, here it is. It's this tiny quantity on some cement basketball courts. Like, for me, I go, this is the solution we've been waiting for. And then everyone goes, oh, but gosh, what will we do with it? Like, what do you mean, what will we do with it? We've done something with it. It's solved. Like, what more, why are you trying to make it a problem?
Well, I think we probably could discuss this for a long time, but as you noted, we definitely should not make it the entire subject. And I think one of the phrases you used a little bit earlier when you talked about sort of a long-term vision was literally transitioning to 100% nuclear. But do you see a role, short-term, long-term, for solar, wind, energy storage technologies, kind of that whole area that's gotten obviously a tremendous amount of financing and attention and policy focus in recent years?
My wife has solar panels in our backyard. People should not be prohibited from owning solar panels. Do I think we should continue to subsidize wind after almost 30 years of subsidies? No. And not only that, the evidence is mounting that when you put spinning blades in the airshed of birds, bats, and insects, it has very significant ecological impacts. There's a big Financial Times story today about the resistance to wind turbines in New York. The grassroots environmentalists in Germany have basically shut down industrial wind development in Germany and the transmission lines. Nebraska is in a complete revolt about an effort to string up a huge transmission line right through whooping crane habitat. If you have nuclear, if you have natural gas and nuclear, why do you need solar panels and industrialized wind turbines? With the principle of energy density, we see it in reality, which is that these facilities take up huge quantities of land. Here in California, they had to pull desert tortoises, baby desert tortoises, out of their burrows, throw them on the back of pickup trucks, put them in pens where many, if not most of them, died because it's not their habitat. So in this kind of delusion that we're harmonizing with the natural world through our, our idols, these big solar and wind farms, we're having a devastating impact on wildlife. It's completely been, the industry has completely hoodwinked much of the media, though I will give some credit. We are seeing more stories now in Financial Times, New York Times, and others. Battery storage. Well, first of all, some amount of storage has always been needed. When they built Diablo Canyon nuclear plant in California in the mid 80s, they built a big pumped storage facility with it. It's like literally like the perfect solution. You know, it really manages the normal supply and demand. But the chaos that has been imposed on California, in addition to our electricity prices rising 6 times more than in the rest of the United States over the last decade because of renewables. Now we almost had blackouts, cascading failures that were obviously because we have way more solar than we can handle. We have to pay Arizona to take it during sunny days. And then there wasn't enough wind or solar to import when everybody was using their air conditioners a few weeks ago. So we almost had blackouts. So we're in this gigantically dangerous experiment with our grid. And here we are, like the 5th largest economy in the world, and our grid almost failed. because of this just wild enthusiasm for renewables, which are having these devastating wildlife impacts that nobody wants to deal with. I look at it and I kind of go, I've always been, I know how people, it's a religious, I mean, for me, the demand for renewables is religious. That's what it animates people's enthusiasm for it. This manic enthusiasm for crappy solar panels made in China and wind turbines that introduce chaos and unreliability and high prices onto the grid. Where's it coming from? Can't be anything other than religious. So I've always been kind of nice about it. But in the book, I document it. And I think the evidence is pretty clear that these are very destructive, parasitical ways to generate electricity.
Well, let's sort of take that to kind of the next step, which is, I mean, if you had the ability to, you know, kind of outline a blueprint for, you know, priorities for federal and state policy in the energy field, you know, right now, and what kinds of actions and changes you would recommend as the key steps that the federal government or state government should take, what would those be?
So, I mean, gas is fine. Natural gas is doing that. That industry, it's so successful that it's destroying itself, right? Bill McKibben and the climate activists want to take credit or something for the fact that our oil and gas industry is so successful and there was a pandemic that slashed energy demand. But natural gas, they don't need any policy, as far as I can tell. They're destroying coal, and they're now threatening to shut down nuclear plants, which we've been defending for the last 5 years. I don't think we should rescue coal. I think we should help those communities that are impacted, obviously. But the big event is nuclear. It's the big event. So if I were in some position to be influential on this, I would say the first thing is we have this incredibly undervalued asset, which are the men and women building nuclear power plants right now in the United States, in Georgia. That's like, when you understand the economics of nuclear, when you read the basic empirical literature, when you look at cases around the world, the only thing that matters is having those workers, the people that are welding pipes, making rebar, pouring cement, because they've learned how to do it now to this ridiculously high level of complexity and skill that was imposed, frankly, on nuclear. It's totally over the top. It's exaggerated. It shouldn't be that much, but it's mostly just about those workers knowing how to build a nuclear plant. As soon as they get done, they should be moved up the road to South Carolina. They should restart the exact same nuclear reactor without change. And then, meanwhile, we need to be competing with China and Russia. This is a national security issue. The line between soft energy and hard energy runs directly through nuclear energy, by which I mean, if you decide to build a nuclear power plant with China, you are in their sphere of influence. Full stop. You're in their sphere of influence. So we're about to let Saudi Arabia work with China to not only build nuclear power plants, but to enrich uranium. Find me a single national security expert on the left or the right who thinks that that's okay, who thinks that that's a good idea to turn over such a sensitive ally like Saudi Arabia to China. And people say, oh, well, that guy, they killed that journalist. They killed journalists in Iran too, and the world is helping Iran to get uranium enrichment. So we're in this insane situation on nuclear energy. It is a national security threat. Getting those workers employed and working them and getting their skills up is the key to then competing with the Chinese and Russian workers. At the end of the day, you know, it's without, if you kind of strip back all the fantasies and the scariness and whatever from nuclear, it's rebar, welding, and cement. Like, that's what it is. And so you just need people that can do that. We have them, but if these two reactors in Georgia are the last two reactors that we build and we stop building nuclear power, then like we're basically consigning the world, the nations that decide to work with China and Russia, to a world of to an anti-democratic, illiberal, authoritarian world. I mean, China's in the process of committing genocide against its Muslim minority. Russia's president has basically declared himself president for life. If countries work with Russia and China, and I mean in Latin America, we're talking Middle East, Latin America, Africa, if that happens, then I think our dream, then I think and by the way, I'm not some colonialist. Like I actually want to compete I don't want to impose this stuff. In fact, I think I've always been opposed to our military interventions abroad. But if we're going to actually help countries remain, be able to live under liberal democracies rather than under authoritarian techno-fascist states like China's imposing, then I think we need to really get back involved in the nuclear game. And suffice it to say, I view climate change the same way. We're not going to deal with climate change with a bunch of mirrors in the desert or spinning bird blenders. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's going to be done with nuclear power.
So Michael, we're going to open it up to our audience in just a minute, but I did want to ask you one last question, because there's been, even in the just couple months since it's been released, a lot of commentary about your book, and I'm just curious whether there was any particular, kind of criticism that you feel has been most off base in terms of how it's interpreted or commented on the book, and then whether there have been critiques or a critique that have made you sort of rethink how you particularly, articulated a point, or whether you would want to revisit it.
I mean, I'm in an active battle right now with Facebook, which censored an article I wrote that was completely factual, and it censored it basically on the basis of two claims, both of which are false. The first claim is that we're in a sixth mass extinction. That's false. Every major scientific organization agrees, and I go through the data in my book. And they censored it because they're claiming that natural disasters are getting worse from climate change. That's not true. Or I should say, that's speculation. That's a hypothesis. But deaths from natural disasters have declined over 90% over the last 100 years. Deaths we just had this huge Category 5 hurricane hit the United States, and I think 4 people died. In Bangladesh, when hurricanes used to kill 150,000 people, 300,000 people. I was on congressional, obviously they consider my book a bit of a threat. I take it as a compliment. I testified 3 times this year before Congress. The second time they attacked me and then they gavelled the meeting to a close without letting me respond. They brought me back a third time, and everybody, including the Democrats, were much nicer. But I was explaining to people that deaths from disasters have been going down, and there's no scientific scenario for that trend to reverse itself. Same thing with what we call the global burden of disease, of infectious disease, I should say, and that includes both deaths and just getting the disease and all the impacts associated with it. The global burden of infectious disease has been going down. There's no scenario for that number to reverse itself, even under 3 to 4 or 4 degrees of warming. There's no scientific scenario. There's nothing in IPCC, just like there's nothing suggesting that food surpluses won't continue to grow as we get warmer. And I explained this on the hearing, and it was just like this, like a webinar with the members of Congress. It was really cool, actually. And I said, look, what they're saying when they say climate change will make disasters or deaths or these other things worse, what they're saying is all else being equal, meaning what they're saying is that deaths would be lower if there were no warming. But not all else is equal, because the warming is a result of us using energy, which is what we need to protect ourselves and to reduce the deaths from disasters and disease. So, I could tell when I said this, how you can tell when somebody's actually listening and learning. I could see in a bunch of their faces, it was the first time anybody had said that to them and that they understood that. And I think for me, that's a very, very important point to understand. It's not to say there's no risks. It's not to say we shouldn't do anything about it. It's not to say it's not real, but you have to understand we're talking about against a baseline of there not being any warming. We're not talking about these wonderful trends of everybody living longer, having not being swept away in cyclones and hurricanes, and not dying from infectious diseases. We're not suggesting that those trends are going to reverse themselves. There's no science for that.
Okay, thanks. All right, so what we're going to do now is open this up to questions that have been coming in from our audience. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin so that he can present the questions that people have written in. Kevin?
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Michael. First question here is from Gary Golden. What are your thoughts on Europe, Asia, and Australia accelerating their investments in power-to-gas green hydrogen as a way of decarbonizing industry and transportation? What role do you see for fossil fuels, and what are the advantages of coupling pipelines and power lines?
Can you say the last one again? Not the hydrogen one, but the one about the coupling. Just say a little slower.
Sure. What is the role of fossil fuels, and what are the advantages of coupling pipelines and power lines?
I mean, I'll say something briefly. I mean, I think a lot of us, I mean, there's basically been an argument in the expert community between whether transportation, the next transportation revolution will be powered by electric cars or by hydrogen gas. I think there's some arguments on both sides. I don't actually address it in the book because I just don't think for me, it's not a big policy question. I would support, R&D for both. I have trouble with, my neighbors here in very affluent Berkeley Hills getting subsidized for both their Teslas and their solar panels. It bothers me from just a basic fairness issue. Why are we making poor people subsidize rich people? But hydrogen obviously has a whole bunch of benefits. There's this idea that it would eventually have hydrogen going through our existing natural gas pipeline infrastructure. I know there's some people that think that's highly improbable. I do think there's problems with the Tesla in the sense that it's very heavy, it's very materials intensive, and generally we want to be dematerializing. And so when we rematerialize a transportation vehicle like they are with Tesla, it makes me question whether that's whether that's really going to get us where we need to go, because basically the trends towards dematerialization is a positive trend we want to support as environmentalists, and just because it's more efficient. Yeah, and then there's a big debate on right now, I think, on this issue of should they ban? They're trying to ban, or they have banned, gas hookups to houses in Berkeley, and it's part of a nationwide movement to quote unquote electrify everything. They're doing that obviously because they want, and maybe it's not obvious, because they want to have more electric demand for solar and wind, and it would buy them a little bit of time, but you still have this fundamental problem, which is why we almost had blackouts, which is just the high level of unreliability creates huge externalized costs onto ratepayers and the society, and we're not even having an honest conversation about who's going to pay for that. So I hope that answers us.
Well, thank you for that. I do seem to be having just a little bit of a connection issue here. We'll push forward, and I will say we have far more questions than we'll be able to get through today. People are very excited to ask here. Next question is from Frank Mannheim. What are your thoughts on Joe Biden's green energy plan?
Great. Now, can you hear me okay? Because you did break up a little bit.
Looks like it's working again. Yep, I hear you fine.
Okay. So, I mean, look, the Biden energy plan is just a massive expansion of solar and wind, and we're in the midst of a huge backlash against solar and wind right now, at the community level. So I just think there needs to be a serious reckoning with the environmental impacts of these technologies. I think that solar panels and wind turbines should have to pay for the cost of their decommissioning, should be included in the cost of the project, as should the cost of the storage of solar panels and wind turbines. That's what nuclear has to do. I don't know why solar and wind wouldn't have to. Well, we know the reason why. It's because it wouldn't be profitable anymore. For me, what's frustrating here is the dishonesty. That there's this, when I was testifying, the Democrats would be like, or the advocates of renewables, I should say, would say, isn't it true that solar panels and batteries are already cheaper than grid electricity? And I was like, no, it's not true. But if you do believe that, then why do you want $2 trillion for solar and wind? So I think Biden has a problem here. I'm a lifelong Democrat, by the way, so I say this as a frustrated Democrat, but they have a problem. I don't think Biden has him personally, I don't think Biden has any trouble with nuclear energy. He'd probably be completely in agreement with my views of just gas and nuclear. In fact, I spoke at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in 2013, where he spoke about gun control. I had many interactions, including with Nancy Pelosi and John Lewis and others, who all responded very positively, actually. Nancy Pelosi made a point of telling me she doesn't have any problem with nuclear. And I don't think Biden does. But of course, you've got a really powerful renewables lobby that now is funneling huge amounts of money to the Democrats. Obviously have a lot at stake if $2 trillion is being handed out. So anyway, short story is I'm not a fan, and I don't think throwing a little bit of money at nuclear R&D is going to do what needs to happen on nuclear.
Thank you for that. Next question here is from Anthony Charles, as well as a comment. The momentum from decades of climate change denial is terrifying. How are we going to trust the energy industry to work toward a solution after decades of working in opposition? It feels like putting the cigarette industry in charge of lung health.
Couldn't hear what he said. I'm sorry, you broke up too much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Let me try one more time here. The momentum from decades of climate change denial is terrifying. How are we going to trust the energy industry to work toward a solution after decades of working in opposition?
Well, let's just put some of this into perspective here. We totaled up the numbers in Apocalypse Never. First of all, the big environmental groups all take in around over 100 million a year in revenue, and that includes Sierra Club, NRDC, EDF. Their budgets often they raise 130 million a year. In Apocalypse Never, we document how significant amounts of money comes from the oil and gas industry and the renewables industry. Over 100 million has gone to Sierra Club from natural gas interests, and two of the biggest natural gas interests that fund environmental groups and that fund the Democratic Party are Mike Bloomberg and Tom Steyer. So when we talk about the energy industry, let's just be clear who we're talking about here and what we mean by climate denial. Now, we also investigated how much money Exxon donated and over the years, and it comes out to about less than 150 million over something like 10 years. And that was for actual skeptics. Sometimes people will say, oh, but they also support other kinds of denial, like American Enterprise Institute, which is this, you may not like them, but they're a pretty established conservative think tank. And AEI, as it's known, supports both a carbon price and R&D for renewables too, and nuclear. But they've supported a carbon tax for a long time, which is what many environmentalists want. So look, you basically have, the whole Exxon funding, first of all, is phased out over 10 years ago. They donated a total that is less than what Environmental Defense Fund brings in revenue every year. And then otherwise, in terms of I'm kind of like, who are these powerful skeptics in the society? Who are these powerful deniers? Can you name one of them with this incredible influence? By contrast, we can all easily name climate alarmists who are global celebrities. Al Gore, Greta Thunberg, every major politician that's a center-left politician. We saw Extinction Rebellion shut down Europe. So, this idea that climate deniers have somehow misled people, it's just not true.
Michael, if you can hear me,
These claims,
Michael, if you can hear me, we seem to have lost your audio for a minute. Can you? There you go. I think you're back now. But
sorry about that.
Yeah, Matt, why don't we move on to the next question?
Sure.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit earlier in the conversation about waste from different sources, particularly renewables versus nuclear. We have a comment from Dan Miller that radioactivity was largely left out of that conversation. What are your views on, how do we compare the waste from, solar and wind turbines compared to nuclear waste? Do you see them as equivalent?
So I mentioned before, I'll just say something very briefly. So solar panel and wind waste goes to landfills. It's not contained, it should be. And if anybody's worried about radiation, this is my favorite fact. I don't even know if I mentioned it in the book though. The production of solar and wind, the mining and the whole life cycle, has a higher radiation exposure than the entire life cycle of nuclear. And that's simply because of the rare earths. Part of the reason I don't mention it is because it's just still not enough radiation to really matter. Basically, we find with nuclear, but also with chemicals, a kind of phobia, a kind of radiophobia and a kind of chemphobia. We see it with the concerns around EMFs, the concerns around 5G. I think and also the concern about fluoride in the water. There's a kind of phobia that often animates a lot of those concerns.
Well, appreciate that, and thank you for bearing with us through the technical difficulties here. Next question we have is from Terrence Hill, and I think you may have spoken a little bit about this in the conversation earlier. What role do you see for small-scale nuclear? going forward?
A small role. So nuclear gets cheaper as the reactors get larger, and that's because you produce more power with fewer workers, both on the construction side and on the production side. So small reactors are the ones that have been uneconomical in the United States. I know everyone's enthusiastic about this new scale company in the United States, but if countries want to do small reactors, they're going to go with the Chinese or the Russians because they know how to build nuclear power plants. So this effort to kind of make nuclear something that it's not. I saw Bill Gates out there proposing that he's going to have nuclear that sort of supports solar and wind. Why have solar and wind if you have nuclear? Doesn't make any sense. So nuclear is now supposed to be kind of like a diesel generator. That's the imagination of a lot of nuclear enthusiasts. I obviously don't. I just kind of go, nuclear power plants are nuclear power plants. Get over your phobias and build them as cheaply and efficiently as you can, and that means they're going to be big, not small.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we could switch gears a little bit here for one of our last couple questions, more of a policy question. This is from Pete Marsh. What is your opinion on carbon fee and dividend? More than 3,500 economists agree that a carbon fee and dividend policy, such as HR 763, would reduce CO2 over 90% by 2050. And since it's market-based, it would be highly durable through changing administrations.
Well, I mean, it's a regulatory scheme. Let's just look at the record. They passed cap and trade in the House in 2009. It failed in the Senate in 2010. Nothing has changed that's going to make that different and nor does that mechanism of rebating the money to consumers matter to consumers. They've done plenty of public opinion research on this question. It just doesn't offer anything that just having regulations offers. But look, you had the Clean Power Plan. It was supposed to, under the Clean Power Plan, the EPA, under Obama's EPA, was supposed to reduce carbon emissions less than they got reduced, and we reduced emissions more by 2020 than we would have under the Clean Power Plan by 2030. So, I mean, look, the main event is fuel switching. We're going to switch from coal to natural gas, and we need more nuclear. I don't think there's a lot of appetite among even Democrats for a cap and trade system right now, much less that cap and dividend. Sorry.
Well, if I could wrap a few questions into one final one here for you. We have a few coming through regarding elements of climate change that I think people would like you to speak to. So, do you see a need to reduce atmospheric levels of greenhouse gas emissions? And how do you approach issues such as sea level rise? Do you see that as a threat to society?
No, no, not at all. In fact, in the book, I talk at great length about it. I mean, what I did in the book is I went and interviewed the 4 scientists who were sort of providing the scientific justification for these apocalyptic claims. I'll tell you something interesting. All 4 of them began their conversation with me by claiming that they were quoted wrong by major publications, by the way, by The Guardian, by The Atlantic, kind of trying to blame the journalists for their apocalyptic claims. I interviewed them at length. I sent them the interview transcripts. I actually published those interviews beforehand so they could, before the book came out, so they could respond to them. None of them have since the book has come out. This idea that sea level rise, just contemplate for a second, 2 feet of sea level rise between now and 2200. The idea that that is somehow some catastrophic threat. I mean, I had a guy on Twitter who was like, yeah, look at this flooding in Miami. And he showed me some pools of water on the road. And I was like, first of all, get out of Miami and go to like somewhere that has a better functioning infrastructure. Are people unaware that we have been adapting to life below sea level in the Netherlands for hundreds of years? They became a rich country while doing it. I find the sea level stuff the most bizarre of the concerns. Sometimes people say, oh, but we'll have to retreat from some coastal areas. Good. We talk it seems like every year there's a series of stories about how we waste money insuring people to live on the coast. You want to live right on the coast, frankly, in what is often very sensitive critical habitat to species? Insure yourself. Why is the society paying for people to live in sensitive coastal areas? And why are we crying about there being less housing development in sensitive coastal areas? It's bizarre. Do I want to reduce carbon emissions? Yes, I've been working for that for 20 years. I'm personally responsible for keeping the equivalent of 12 million cars of carbon dioxide off the road over the last 5 years by fighting to keep nuclear plants open. I don't think, again, it's like, stop saying that, stop treating something as apocalyptic that's not, and stop imagining that you need an apocalyptic reason to do things. We made so much progress fighting cancer without telling people that everybody's going to have cancer. And frankly, we've made pretty big success on climate change. I mean, Germany, France, Britain have all saw their carbon emissions peak in the mid 70s, and they peaked in the United States 13 years ago. So let's keep doing the things that have worked, which have been natural gas and nuclear, and stop killing wildlife in the name of harmonizing with the natural environment in terms of renewables, or stop trying to prevent poor countries from develop, because I think those are the two most insidious agendas that get advanced in the name of preventing climate apocalypse.
Michael, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think we could continue this conversation a long time, but we do promise people we stick to our schedule. And I'm just going to turn it over to my co-host, Jeff Holmstead of Bracewell. I want to thank Jeff and Bracewell for co-hosting this with me. And Jeff, any final thoughts?
No, I will just say that my law firm Bracewell is delighted to be a supporter of our energy policy, and especially to be a co-host of today's event. Michael, we all thank you for a very interesting and I think important event and discussion. And I think a lot of us will look forward to engaging on these same issues on the online discussion next week. So with that, I will just thank Michael again and all of the other partners for supporting OEP. And I hope everyone will be able to join us for our next event in just a few weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all of you for joining. Hope all of you stay well, stay healthy, have a good Labor Day, and look forward to you joining our online discussion. Thanks again, Michael. Thanks to all.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks,
Bye, guys. Bye, everybody.